Welcome everyone to the Wilmette Institute's latest webinar. And today, the topic is Religion and Science in the Globalized World, Part 1. We will be having a second webinar on this topic as well in August, which I will mention in a moment. The Wilmette Institute's regular webinar series has as its purpose to highlight the immense diversity of the Baha'i teachings and the ways they contribute to the contemporary world, and particularly to the prevailing discourses of society. Obviously, religion and science is an important topic, and so we're very happy to be covering that particular one today. Now, let me very quickly move on and talk about some of our upcoming things before I actually turn to this particular event. We have several more webinars coming up next week. Mikhail Sergeev, who is the host of our panel today, will also be the speaker next week, and his topic will be the Baha'i Faith in Russia, History and Contemporary Developments. And we're very much looking forward to that particular presentation. Then on August 13th, Religion and Science in the Globalized World Part 2 will be held with a different panel of 3 speakers. I should add that all 6 of the speakers, the 3 today and the 3 on the second panel, were all authors in a book, which I'm sure someone will hold up at some point in the middle of this program. There it is. They are all authors of the book, with Mikhail being the editor. So we'll have 3 more people on August 13th, and I should round out our upcoming summer webinars by mentioning that Gisu Muhajir will be speaking about A Child in the Holy Land, a book that she's just published recently, on August 26th. She herself, of course, is the daughter of Hand of the Cause of God, Muhajir, and spent a good amount of time in the Holy Land as a result. I should also mention 3 courses that are coming up in August. We have no courses in July because of work on our website. Science, Religion, and the Baha'i Faith starts on August 16th. The 7 Valleys and 4 Valleys through Creative Arts Expression will be on August 23rd, and then Operationalizing Moral Excellence in Business starts on August 30th. All 3 of those courses are about 7 weeks long, and you can register for them at our website. Today, I'll mention our host very briefly, and then I will turn all of this over to him, Dr. Mikhail Sergeev, who has a PhD from Temple University in Philadelphia and teaches at the University of the Arts there. He's also the chairman of the Wilmette Institute's Theology, Philosophy, and Religious Studies Department, and coordinates our courses on philosophy and theology. He'll be doing a course, in fact, on Baha'i ethics in December, which we're very much looking forward to. He has edited several books on various topics relating to Baha'i faith and philosophy, of which this book, of which people just held up, is the latest. And so I will now turn the program over to Mikhail, who can now introduce the panel and get us started. Thank you all for joining us today. The Wilmette Institute is very grateful for your presence and your active contribution to this particular webinar.
So thank you for this introduction, Robert, and I would like to begin by welcoming our speakers today. All our speakers are participants, authors in the book Religion and Science in the Globalized World. We have 3 speakers today who will talk about different aspects of globalization. Sovaida Ma'ani Ewing, who is the director of the Center for Peace and Global Governance. Then Hooshmand Badee, the author and faculty of the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education. And finally, Paul Hanley, who is an author and environmentalist. Welcome to our participants. Now, before we move on to the presentations, I would like also to say to our viewers, and I see that the viewers are coming, please don't be shy and write something in the chat. We appreciate any questions that you have. If you are watching us on YouTube, please write your question or your comment or your reaction. Or if you really have nothing to ask, simply write something friendly and write where you are watching us from. Because every comment on YouTube makes this video more watchable. That is very important. Also, please do not forget to like our video and to subscribe to the channel, to the YouTube channel of the Wilmette Institute. So now, without further ado, let me invite and welcome our first panelist, Sovaida Ma'ani Ewing. Please, Sovaida, your turn.
Thank you. That's very kind. Hello, everyone. It's delightful to be back here with the Wilmette Institute and in the company of my distinguished colleagues. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I have a short slide presentation here, so we can get going. So the theme of my article in this book and what I've been asked to speak about briefly today is globalization as the tangible expression of humanity's journey towards unity. Now, the term globalization evokes a lot of emotional reaction, both positive and negative. So I'd like to start by defining what I mean by globalization for the purposes of this conversation. And this is the definition I've chosen: the process of ever-increasing human interdependence across long distances, resulting in deepening global integration. Now, I melded basically two definitions from two scholars, Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University and Ian Golden of Oxford University, and this is what I arrived at. The one thing to remember, and we'll come back to this, is that globalization, according to most learned scholars, is a feature of our history. It's not a bug. It's not something recent. It's not something that, is bad that we should do away with, and we'll look at why in a second. Now, globalization has produced essentially two effects, positive and negative. The positive side is that it has created opportunities for economic growth and rising incomes, also opportunities for wide dissemination of knowledge and learning through the spread of advanced technologies like the mobile phones and the internet. And according to Ian Golden, it has been the most powerful driver of human progress in the history of humanity. Yet we as human beings tend to focus on the negative aspects of globalization. And we're going to turn to this in a second and look at the fact that globalization, because it has made us more interdependent and integrated, has made us basically systemically one. And therefore, it's no surprise that it has also subjected us to systemic risks. Risks like the spread of pathogens like COVID-19, we've had a really good example of this, or the financial crisis of 2008, which started initially as a housing price bubble in the United States, which eventually triggered a global financial crisis. Now, our typical reaction as human beings when we think something is negative is to become very myopic, very short-sighted. And we lose our capacity to read our reality accurately. And we end up doing one of two things typically. This is something that's been discussed at length by another Harvard scholar, Sean Aker. He says we either tend to repeat the same behavior. So in this case, globalization, oh my gosh, it has negative results. Let's just keep doing more of the same and not look at the negative results and stick our heads in the sand, which is clearly not a good thing. Because the ill effects just compound. Or the second inclination is, oh my gosh, let's take a few steps back and reverse course. Now, one of the things that scholars make clear is that globalization was a process that started when modern humans migrated from Africa 70,000 years ago, and it has led to ever-deepening integration. So much so that we've become so woven together as a human race and so bound in our destiny that it's impossible to undo. The way I like to put it is that the egg's been scrambled and now we cannot unscramble it. And indeed, as Jeff Sachs says, every time we've tried to undo globalization or reverse it in the past, it's proved disastrous and has led to either what we consider the dark ages or militarism. There are a whole bunch of examples in the article, which I hope you will read to support this, But one brief one is the Luddites in the 19th century Britain, the people who felt very threatened by the modern textile machinery and the frames for weaving that were being introduced. They used to do everything by hand, and they feared very much that their jobs would disappear. So they used to break into the textile factories and smash all the machines. So what they were trying to do was arrest or reverse the process of globalization, as opposed to trying to mitigate its risks by creating a social structure that ensured that income was distributed more fairly. So what we need to do, I say next in this article, is that we need to recognize that there are benefits of globalization, which we want to keep, while also recognizing that there are risks, but the way to deal with them is to manage and mitigate them. So the trick here is to learn how to manage and mitigate risks, because if we don't, a couple of things happen. Failure to mitigate and manage risks leads to them festering and proliferating, and leads to a cascade of global challenges, including nuclear proliferation, runaway climate change, financial crises, global pandemics, terrorism, so on and so forth. The second thing that happens when we fail to mitigate and manage globalization is that we see a backlash from society. We see a backlash from nations that leads to a bunch of insular practices like xenophobia. We saw this in Europe when we saw the tsunami of migrants coming from the Middle East and Africa. We saw the reaction, the xenophobic reaction led to the rise of the far right in Europe and eventually led to Brexit. There's basically this rending apart of the fabric of society. It also leads to isolationism, protectionism, as we saw with the tariff trade wars between China and the US, and nationalism, this whole concept of our country first. We're seeing it everywhere, from Russia to Turkey to Hungary to the United States to, we even saw it in Britain and in France. So this has become quite a theme, China and so on. And of course, we then have the wars that result from the nationalism, including the current war in Ukraine and other longstanding wars in Syria and Yemen and Tigray. Interestingly, these insular practices tend to come as clusters, just like autoimmune diseases do. If you know anything about autoimmune diseases, you know that once you get one, chances are very high that you'll develop one or more of the others. Now, some people say it's time to reverse from globalization and go back to regionalization. And I just very quickly wanted to say that that's not a solution, because many of our existential challenges today are global in nature and require global solutions, which won't happen through regionalization. So what do we actually do? Jeff Sachs says that we need to start acting smarter in order to manage and mitigate the risks of globalization. Two steps involved. The first step is that we need to create a new mindset around globalization. In other words, reframe our concept of globalization by letting go of limiting beliefs and assumptions that globalization is only bad for us and we need to quash and reverse it. How do we do this? By adopting three new lenses that are really given to us by the Baha'i writings because of Baha'u'llah and this fresh revelation that he's brought, this fresh injection of divine wisdom. The first I call the maturation analysis, and it's a particular conception of human history given to us in the Baha'i writings, that history is basically a collective journey of humanity towards maturity, marked by ever-widening circles of integration and unity. Sound familiar? This was the definition of globalization that we started with, right? Offered by Jeff Sachs and Ian Golden. So we see that these two start to mesh. Humanity is approaching its maturity. It needs to abandon old fetishes that were fit for its childish days, that represented a distortion of its spirit and did not represent the essence of who we are. But we also need to be patient with ourselves and yet be careful not to prolong this stage of turbulent adolescence through which we're going. The second lens is to recognize that humanity has become a single organism. Again, globalization has made us so interconnected and interdependent that Baha'u'llah says we have de facto become like a human body. It doesn't make sense for the liver to say to the kidneys, I don't care if you're diseased, I'm out for number one, my country first, my organ first. Doesn't make sense because a diseased, any organ will eventually create disease in the body, which will afflict all the other parts of the body. So there's literally a law here, a spiritual law at work, and that is the law of oneness, which in the social and spiritual realm is akin to the physical law of gravity. We can choose to ignore it, but we do so at our peril. And just as we wouldn't build an airplane without taking into account the law of gravity, we would be foolish to build any of our environmental, political, economic, etc. institutions, failing to take it into account. The Universal House of Justice, the governing body of the Baha'i faith today, says that we need to develop a vision of our shared identity and common purpose, or else we will be buffeted by competing ideologies and power struggles and an endless permutation of us and them, which leads to the tearing of the social fabric. I love the way they've couched this. The third understanding we need to come to is that suffering, while not necessary, and we shouldn't seek it, and we certainly shouldn't commit injustices and then tell people, oh, suffering's good for you. But if suffering is there can be some benefits from it. It catalyzes a shift in collective thinking, according to the guardian of the Baha'i faith, that leads to a stirring of human conscience, a disillusioning of the masses, which then prompts a radical change in the very conception of society, which then leads to the coalescing of our disjointed, bleeding joints into one organically indivisible body, the human race. Shoghi Effendi, again, the guardian, says it's a fire. Suffering is a fire that fuses discordant elements of society. And it also instills a sense of responsibility in leaders of this new age. I love that phrase from him. It also calls us to account for past actions in the form of a punishment, and it purges and prepares us for our new mission. Interestingly, both Sachs and Golden also recognize the role of suffering and disaster in bringing about the next level of change. Now, the second step and the last step that we need to do is to manage and mitigate risks is to develop certain capacities, powers, and tools needed for this stage of maturity to which humanity is arriving. And they'll give us a smarter and more effective way of managing globalization. All three, by the way, are based on harnessing benefits of globalization, like improved communication, in order to develop and hone core disciplines of collaboration, cooperation, and extensive consultation to find solutions. Just look at what the scientists did during COVID. As a result of that collaboration, putting aside their egos, putting aside the desire to be the first to publish and keeping their research secret, they collaborated. And so we went from 12 to 14 years that it normally took to find and roll out a vaccine to several of them being rolled out in the course of 11 months. That's phenomenal. So imagine what the human race can do if we all come together to collaborate and cooperate. Now, we need three things that we need to collaborate on. One is to create collective decision-making and enforcement institutions that meet the challenges of our time. Most of our challenges are collective in nature and therefore demand collective solutions. Just look at climate change, global financial crises, and wars like the one in Ukraine that have led to a global food crisis, global energy crisis, global economic crisis, and the threat of nuclear war. Ian Golden says, our capacity to manage global issues has not kept pace with the growth in their complexity and danger. And that global institutions, which may have had some success in the 20th century, are now unfit for purpose. The Baha'i teachings categorically state that the world will eventually need to create a world government. Some Baha'is have said to me, oh, we don't use that phrase. Oh, yes, we do. It's in the literature quite a lot. And it will initially come about when the majority of nation states formally commit themselves to a global order comprising institutions and laws equipped with the means by which collective decisions can be enforced. Then as humanity continues to evolve and get more mature, we'll create a world federation, which is the final consummation of society's evolution. And this is something that Abdu'l-Baha, the son of the Prophet founder, and his successor and the authorized interpreter of his writings, this is something he said to a US official when he visited in 1912. He said, if you want to help the United States and the world assist in the eventual application of the principle of federalism that underlies your system of government to the relationships between the peoples in the world. Now, institutions of themselves are not enough. Abdu'l-Baha says any institution can be subject of abuse. What we also need to do in tandem is to identify a set of global ethics that are shared between us and weave them into the very fabric of our institutions. Both Sachs and Golden also agree on this, which is an idea that the Universal House of Justice articulated in 1986. But later, Sachs and Golden said that we need to create a model of understanding and ethics on the basis of which to build global peace. And Golden argues that ethics is a central concern in our discussions on the future of global governance. What sorts of principles are we talking about? The law of oneness, which should be made the ruling principle of international life, according to the Baha'i writings. Dispensing with the idea of unfettered national sovereignty, which is considered an immature fetish. The principle of collective security that requires that nations limit the arms they have in order to have only what's necessary to preserve internal order, and that if one nation flouts this rule, all the nations unitedly will arise against it and force it to submit. And the principle that force is to be used solely in service of justice, with an international force to guarantee this. Now, there'll be skeptics amongst you, and all I will say, and you can go and look this up in the article, is that this has been done before, identifying and agreeing collectively, 193 nations agreeing upon a global principle. And it is in my article, it has to do with the responsibility to protect, which only took 5 years from conceptualization to endorsement by all 193 nations. The last thing we need to do is learn to elect fit leaders that have certain qualities and motivations. First, we need to change our concept of power and recognize it as not a means of domination, but rather a necessary element in social organization, whose role it is to create the environment in which we can all actualize our potential. And we start to associate power with words like release, encourage, channel, guide, enable. These words, verbs all come from a message of the Universal House of Justice of 2013. And power, it really has to do with a limitless capacity within the human race to transform. So in conclusion, imagine if we did these three things. Imagine what a different world we would have. Imagine all the problems that would be solved. We would have critical natural sources that are equitably managed and distributed. The quantity of arms in each nation would be restricted. We wouldn't have wars like the one in Ukraine. We wouldn't fear wars like one in Taiwan or wars anywhere else in the Middle East or in Kashmir. We'd manage our financial and economic resources so we didn't have destabilizing financial crises. We would manage and mitigate climate change, and we'd have the tools to tackle pandemics. In short, we would live in a world at peace and in security. I just wanted to say that if you are interested in learning more about this, you can pick up a copy of the book that we talked about, and you can also look at The Alchemy of Peace, which is a book that covers a whole bunch of these topics that is available everywhere on Amazon. So thank you very much, and I will turn this over to Mikhail.
Thank you, Sovaida, very much for that presentation. I see that we are having already some questions, but I have to tell my viewers that our viewers that we are going to reserve all the questions for the end of the panel for Q&A session. We will proceed first with the presentations, and then we will try to cover as many questions as possible, hopefully all of them. I also have to tell those viewers who are latecomers, I see that there are a lot of them, that I urge you to not to be shy, to ask questions, to write down your questions. When you are writing down your questions, please name the person to whom you actually are referring this question, to either Sovaida or Hooshmand or Paul. That's number one. Number two, if you are watching us on YouTube, please like our program and write something in the chat, because the more activity we have there, the better our video will do according to the YouTube algorithm. More people will be able to watch it, and everybody will profit from that, not materially, but spiritually, obviously. So with that, I invite our second speaker, Hooshmand Badee. Please, your turn.
Well, thank you very much, Mikhail. Let me first congratulate you for publishing this very timely book. My title in the book is that Globalization Requires Bahá'í Foundation. And it seems that I'm going to continue the discussion of Sovaida that started. It was a good start. And also, let me say that it is very difficult to summarize the whole chapter in a few minutes. But I have written a few things in my notes that I'm going to share with you, and at the same time, adding a few points that was not possible to include in the main chapter. In my paper, I maintain the view that globalization is a fact. It is a reality, and it is going to happen whether we want it or not. So because it is going to happen, we have to see how we can fix it rather than to defeat it. I am talking in my paper about a kind of globalization that is sensible, that is equitable and sustainable, and bring prosperity to the entire humanity. And for this to happen, there is a need for a good foundation, a strong foundation that lasts for a long time. Justice and unity are the main ingredients of making the globalization stronger. And for most Baha'i research, actually, we cannot avoid or ignore the concept of unity. Of course, the vision of all faiths, as we know, has been the establishment of unity, but it came in stages of unity of family, of tribes, of city, nations, and now is the time for establishing the unity or oneness of the entire human race. In my paper, I have made a distinction between unity and oneness. According to Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, he said that oneness is the pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve. So, according to this statement, promoting oneness is the object of life Baha'i. Oneness is such an important principle in the Baha'i faith that we can call the Baha'i faith a religion of oneness. Let me expand a little bit more on the idea of unity because it has faced some disagreement as well. Some critics believe that the idea of unity of humankind is utopia. They say that the idea is good, but not practical. Now, considering today's unpleasant conditions of the world, critics have a valid point to be critical of unity. So the problem is not with the idea of unity, but with the obstacles available to create unity, including gender inequality, discrimination, human rights problems, increasing the gap between the rich and the poor, conflicts of all types, all kinds of prejudices and the self-interest and many more problems of this nature. So the things such as unity and oneness and peace and justice should be a norm and become a way of life. What is abnormal and should be disconnected and removed from our society are the barriers towards unity and justice. Globalization also produces disagreement, which is fine. Disagreements are there because of the wrong process shaping and reshaping globalization. The views of two great thinkers of our time and experts in globalization, Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz, are that there is nothing wrong with the idea of globalization, but the process and the strategies adopted is wrong. In this paper, I have mentioned that the current process of globalization has generated unbalanced results. For example, the benefits of globalization have not been distributed fairly and justly among citizens of the world. Also in this paper, I have used the analogy of the family in setting the right process of creating globalization, because there is a close connection between the similarities of the structure of a family and those of a global society. In another part of the paper, I have also discussed the two principles of equality and equity and their effects and impact on globalization. Knowing the difference between equality and equity helps the process. Under the principle of equality, all citizens are equal before the law of the land, and this is done by a just government. The legislators establish equality to create justice for all citizens. However, we are different in terms of capability and talent and our education, and therefore people are not equal in terms of economic terms. Therefore, there should be economic freedom, there should be equal opportunities and means available for citizens, for all citizens on the globe, to discover their capability and their talents and have a chance to progress. Therefore, in a society, we need ethical legislators who apply moral principles such as compassion and empathy in determining laws that provide equal opportunities to all citizens. This view is of great importance in relation to the creation of an ideal globalization. For example, the poor people are saved and come out of poverty as soon as possible. Or, for example, the benefits of globalization are benefited fairly and justly and impartially among citizens of the world. In another part of the paper, I have redefined the concept of spirituality for welcoming all. This is needed to bring the concept of spirituality from the vague promises given to the next world to our responsibilities in this world. For welcoming all sorts of people, it is sensible to reconcile the viewpoints of social scientists, theologians, people of all faiths, and secular thinkers, in agreement and applying a common concept of spirituality. Another secular thinkers, for example, try to distance themselves from organized religions. And they recognize principles, however, when they come face to face with problems, even if they are not affiliated with an organized religion. About this, I have mentioned several examples in my paper, and I would like to say one in connection of what Sovaida also mentioned about the global financial crisis of 2008. Most of us may remember that in 2008, at the start of the crisis, the experts identified the source of the problems as financial. And therefore, they started to solve problems with all types of short-term monetary policies known as quantitative easing, which is mainly supply of money or printing more money. These kind of short-term policies, according to experts, should solve problems within 2 years. However, after 4 years and 5 years in Europe and United States, the problems were still there. And in some other countries, even more than that. Then the same experts and social scientists that changed their mind. Now they believe that the root cause of the problems were not financial. It was the lack of honesty. It was the absence of trustworthiness and truthfulness and mismanagement of money in the financial institutions and not money itself. In other words, when experts and social scientists come face to face with problems, they identify spiritual principles, even if they are not affiliated with any organized religion. We cannot, friends, solve the problems at the surface. If we do at the surface, it will come back. For example, during the Great Depressions of 1930s, the problem was solved at the surface by using monetary policies. And therefore, it returned in 2008, global financial crisis. If we continue solving problems at the surface, it will come back. We have to fix the problems from the foundation. The problem is the absence of unity and all kinds of injustices around us. Establishing right strategies for achieving sensible and equitable and sustainable globalization is a huge task, and we cannot achieve it overnight. It takes time and requires proper foundation. I have also given a different interpretation of the concept of economics. Economic textbooks define economics in a narrow way. Economics basically is not about prices and supply and demand and goods and services. These are just means. Economics is about relationship between people. It is about people's behavior. It is about the relationship between buyers and sellers. It is about the relationship between bankers and those who want to apply for bank loans. It is the relationship between employees and employers. And when we talk about relationship, about behavior, then ethical and spiritual principles become a foundation. Principles such as kindness, compassion, caring, and honesty become the foundation. These moral and spiritual principles are required to solve economic problems at a global level. So far, the requirements of establishing the process of globalization have been a top-down planning, with hundreds and hundreds of international conferences every year held to tell us how the globalization should work, and it's not working. Why not start with the bottom-up planning, starting with families and children at home and schools? Children must learn the concept of world citizenship. Children must learn the fact that there is only one race, and that is the human race. Children must know that there are no enemies. We are all friends. Children should know the importance of the Earth's resources to protect the environment, and perhaps by observing moderation in all aspects of life. And most importantly, knowing the purpose of life. When children grow up with such attitudes, they will be great leaders of the world in the future to build the foundation of a good globalization. So the process of achieving sustainable globalization requires a long-term planning. These are some of the practical ways to make unity stronger. Unity must become a norm, a way of life, and the best target group are children and junior youths. Let me end this short presentation by saying that there are good news as well for celebration. And some of the statements of people and institutions that heard frequently during this COVID-19 are very promising for celebration. And I have gathered some of them that I will share with you. Here are few examples. People say connecting without any discrimination. We are all in this together. The whole planet faces the same emergency. We want tomorrow to be better than yesterday. Let's share the good things of this world. The dream of becoming connected is becoming a reality. So we can collectively be proud of these statements and be optimistic about a bright future and about the creation, a type of globalization that is sensible, equitable, sustainable, and bring prosperity to the entire humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hooshmand Badee. Thank you for your presentation. I see that questions are coming, and I look at our YouTube chat, and I salute those of you who not only ask questions, but write comments. Andrew Lafton, for example, thank you for saying that you are pleased to be participating today. We welcome you. Dean Hedges says that he's listening us from Orlando, Florida. So please, guys, I see that many more of you are watching us on YouTube as well as here on Zoom. If you are watching on YouTube, please like our program and write a comment, because the YouTube algorithm is set the way that the more likes and the more comments, no matter what kind of comments we have, the more this YouTube will be presented to people and the more people could watch it. So this is a free option. You don't have to spend any money. You simply have to be more proactive. So please, we need more likes, more comments. Tell us what city, what state, what country you are watching us from. And now we are moving to our third presenter and third presentation. Let me remind you that we are speaking about globalization in this first panel. And our third presenter is Paul Hanley. Paul, please, this is your turn.
Thank you, Mikhail. Appreciate it. And I appreciate all the effort you put into bringing this book together. And thanks to our Sovaida and Hooshmand for excellent starting presentations. And I can say aloha to you all from Molokai in Hawaii. And I even put on this is formal dress where I'm living now. And even to put a shirt on is kind of formal, because it's normally very warm and pleasant. So it's so nice to be with you and all the folks who are listening. I see over 40 people in the participants. And I'd like to get into a little bit more specific area, which is food systems. And I'm just going to share my screen with you in a few slides. So we're looking at building a just and sustainable food system on a global level. How can we make sure that we're delivering proper nutrition to everybody everywhere? And it's a huge problem, but a huge opportunity to also bring people together. So just when I was working on preparing a presentation, I saw this article just a couple of weeks ago in the journal Nature. And it says hunger and famine are not accidents. They're created by actions of people. And I looked into this article, and then the article it's based on is this article on conflict. And I'm just going to minimize this. Conflict and the Right to Food by the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Michael Fakhari. And very interesting article. And basically, Fakhari talks about how conflict and violence are the primary causes of hunger and famine. And so, this is a different way of looking at things. Usually we think that the food system, agriculture, is a supply problem. There isn't enough food for people. But his understanding is that it's quite different than that. It's not a supply issue, essentially. The problem is one of violence that may involve colonialism, violence of race and gender, economic and class, and also violence against nature, against other species and ecosystems. So this level of violence and conflict is actually undermining our ability to achieve nutrition for all. So this goal of achieving a just and sustainable food system is not primarily a technical issue of production. It's really a problem of disunity. So that brings us to this concept of globalization and global unity and oneness of humanity. And reading this article by the rapporteur on the right to food made me kind of think again about this tablet of Baha'u'llah, the Tablet of the World, in which he talks about the importance of agricultural development and how it's one of the principles conducive to the advancement of mankind and the reconstruction of the world. And he talks about 5 principles, one of which is agricultural development. But the other principles, international cooperation and disarmament, a new ethos of universal fellowship, a universal auxiliary language, and the training and education of children. You know, thinking in terms of what the special rapporteur was saying, you can see how all of these things are conducive to the type of, to the fostering of unity amongst people, which is really the basis of developing a food and agricultural system that's just and sustainable. All these different principles actually kind of serve this goal. So in other words, you know, if violence and conflict are the cause of hunger, obviously international cooperation and disarmament are essential. This ethos of universal fellowship being instilled in people, even an auxiliary language that makes it possible for people to communicate more effectively cross-border. And of course, the training and education of children, not only in practical things and technical knowledge, science, and so on, but also in moral development. These will all be essential ingredients of a just and sustainable food system, one that's built on the unity of humanity. And I think, you know, for Baha'is who are familiar with the plans of the Baha'i faith and our core activities that happen at the community level, we can see how all of these things actually build this kind of unity and cooperation amongst people that relate directly to a just and sustainable food system by building the foundation for unity. Now, it's interesting that Abdu'l-Baha and really the central figures of the faith were very involved in agriculture and food systems. And Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah's son, talked about this idea of beginning with the village. He was asked about the economic problems in the world. He said, the solution begins with the village, and when the village is reconstructed, then the cities will be also. And he said that this approach, beginning at the community level, would, if this became established, justice will prevail and there will be no war. And of course, being a man of action, Abdu'l-Baha himself became quite active in community development at the village level, and even started villages like Adasiya in Jordan, where he worked with people to put these different practices into action. So in looking at Baha'i concepts and principles related to agriculture and food systems, I found about 100 different concepts, and I don't expect you to read all of these. I'll show you a little more detail. And I think when we look at this, we realize that the technical aspect of agriculture is not the only thing that Baha'u'llah is talking about when he says that agriculture is one of the fundamental principles for the administration of human affairs. It's really a holistic approach. And really there are basically 4 elements there's a concept that agriculture is central to community and central to global systems. But we need to engage people as individuals, we need to engage institutions, and we need to engage communities. And on top of that, we also need to really think about sustaining an ever-advancing civilization, which really means sustaining ecosystems, which are the base and the foundation upon which everything is built. So agricultural development unfolds within wider processes of community development and global regeneration, social, economic, and ecological. And it involves these three protagonists in the development of societies, individuals, communities, and institutions. And the object of these processes is to release the society-building powers of the Baha'i faith. So in the area of building capacity in individuals, this is very important. And I found perhaps 22 different elements that are contained in the teachings that relate to this, and then are conducive to building the type of system that can ensure a just and sustainable food system for the world. And I think the thinking here is that a system can't be so good that people within it do not have to be good. So in the context of a systems approach, achieving an effective and resilient food system will be dependent on the values, qualities, virtues, and capacities of its participants, the whole population. So these capacities are both the technical capacities around things like science and food systems and so on, but also the moral qualities, things like trustworthiness, which Hooshmand had mentioned earlier, has been found to be central to an effective system. In terms of building unified and prosperous communities, I found 40 different elements that relate to this theme of agricultural systems, and basically the idea of globalization being built up from local and regional communities as sort of healthy cells within this global organism. And one of the important things that the faith talks about is recognition of the station of the farmer as being the kind of the first producer in society. The importance of grassroots and consultative processes at the community level in shaping effective systems. Nonpartisan governance models was mentioned earlier by Sovaida, the idea of finding how we can select actually fit leaders. And so governance models that we use are so important. And gender equity, very important in this area, because as we know, throughout much of the world, women are the main producers of food and are often not recognized for that. And development of village and neighborhood institutions is central, effective institutions. And we are starting to see this in many parts of the world. Again, looking at the institutional level of the protagonists and a just and equitable world order, I found about 15 elements which are very significant here. So establishing a form of democratic global governance appropriate to an interdependent and highly connected planet. This importance of recognizing the oneness of humanity, that it becomes part of our consciousness. Developing nonpartisan approach to government, demilitarization, releasing huge amounts of resources for effective development, and wealth distribution, redistribution is very important. In the area of sustaining an ever-advancing civilization, I found 25 different elements. And of course, all of these are described in my chapter in the book. Everything we do must be thought of in terms of sustainability and how this really is the foundation for all the different elements of an effective system. So one of the things the faith teaches is the recognition of the intrinsic value of nature and turning that into a spiritual principle. And humanity now understood as trustees of the ecosphere, and recognition of the rights of nature, that everything has rights, not just human rights, but all species and all elements in the natural system have rights. So I'll just conclude here and just share this quotation from the writings of Baha'u'llah, where he says, this is a part of a longer quotation, but O thou who art the Lord of Lords, I confess that thou hast no desire except the regeneration of the whole world and the establishment of the unity of its peoples and the salvation of all them that dwell therein. So this, I just found it very interesting that this is saying that God has no desire except this regeneration of the world and the establishment of unity amongst the people and their salvation. So I'll end with that, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody, for your excellent presentations. Now we are moving to a Q&A session, and we are streaming for already 1 hour. So we have a lot of questions, but I will probably select some of them that are, closer to the presentations themselves. But before I do that, let me say that Andrew Lefton watches us from Minnesota, and Kay Rothnam is watching us from Kelowna, British Columbia. I hope that I'm pronouncing this right. Jenny Lee watching us from British Columbia as well. Thank you for your good words. Jazzy Saraya is watching us from Luxembourg. We salute you, Jazby. And Gary Roysha is watching us from Kyiv, Ukraine. And he's writing, as you know, I'm south of Kyiv, helping children at our farm, which is a distance learning center. So far, about 100 children have been living here. Salutations to Gary. Del Sabeti is watching us from Hungary. So people are watching us from all over the world, to sum up. And thank you very much that you actually responded to my plea to write as many comments as possible. So now let me turn to the questions. And we have 2 questions that are not directed specifically to a presenter. So whoever wants to answer, you are welcome. The first question comes from Stephen Freiberg. Hi, Stephen, who writes, could you talk about the legitimate aspects of the Luddite movement, much of which was in response to the rise of centralized manufacturing in the 19th century and the loss of independence? It's very relevant here in Silicon Valley with its huge income differentials. Any comments or reactions about that?
To tell you, I know I raised the Luddites, and I think I'm going to refer back to something Hooshmand said, which is that it's key in resolving these issues. So what happened with the Luddite movement, it was the next step in globalization, massive inequality, inequity, and reaction, understandable reaction. But instead of kind of throwing out the whole process of globalization, what ideally would have been done is people for society to do what Hooshmand was suggesting, which is to recognize, the process and the strategies, I think those are the 2 words you used, Hooshmand, are incorrect. And maybe there's a different way of going about this. We are industrializing, we're going to be using machinery. Yes, there will be people out of jobs. But for instance, creating opportunities to retrain and retool people so that they don't lose jobs, so they can maintain their human dignity, so they can be contributing human beings in society. That's one possible approach. Another is to create, say, we need to legislate. Again, this is something that Hooshmand alluded to or mentioned directly. We need to have ethical legislators who recognize that we now need a system of laws, say social welfare laws, that ensures that people don't fall between the cracks while we go through this transition. One potential law that could be added is the laws of taxation that we're very averse to in this country, in the United States, the idea of taxing the very wealthy a lot more and then distributing the proceeds equitably to those who are in need and do not yet have the opportunities, the equal opportunities to work. So it's really a question of society coming together, as I said, using the tools of collaboration, cooperation, and consultation, and based on the spiritual values of justice and truth and equity and equality that Hooshmand mentioned, and the recognition of our oneness, that if one hurts, then all of us hurt, in order to come up with a just and equitable solution. Baha'u'llah, after all, said he's come to bring the most great justice. And that through unity, through justice, we will achieve unity. So it's a step in the process.
Thank you, Sovaida. Valerie Ferguson is watching us from Miami, and we are continuing our Q&A session. This is a question from Robert Moshrefzadeh. I hope I pronounced this right, but if not, please forgive me. The concept of a world government and regionalization are not necessarily mutually exclusive, as global issues can be addressed globally, while more regional issues such as culture and regional climate can be addressed more regionally. So I guess this is a question either to Paul or to Hooshmand. Anyone wants to respond?
Well, if you allow me, as I said in my presentation, this concept of globalization cannot be achieved overnight. It is a process. It takes time, and we should not expect it happen in the next few decades. In my view, it is better to start things from regionalization, from nationalization to regional and then to globalization. Let me say one example, the example of single currency. We cannot have single currency at this time, a world single currency. We have to practice that at the region. Example is, right now we have a few regional currency. We have in Africa, we have in the Caribbean, the best one we know is the EU, Euro currency. So when we have this single currency at region, then we know what kind of problems we are facing. Right now, Euro currency started in 2000. They forgot to consider that a regional currency, a single currency, requires other aspects to be considered, such as the wage in Europe, such as taxation in Europe, such as distribution of money in a number of countries. They did not consider these kind of ideas. They just started to print money and distribute to the 27 countries. And later on, they realized the problems. So it is actually good to have regional currency, and we see what kind of problems we have, what are the advantages and disadvantages. And when the time comes for a world currency, we know what type of currency we want for the world currency. So a number of issues, in my view, should start at the regional. It is better. So we see what kind of problems we have, so that when we come to globalization, we don't repeat those kind of mistakes or disadvantages. Maybe
that I could add in also,
Please,
when it comes to food systems, I think we're experiences like the world pandemic showed us that we need to actually have a system that a food system that where local communities and regions are very strong in production of food. For example, I live on a small Pacific island, and when the system started to break down, you can't just you know, the store is all closed. There's no food easily available, and all the food comes in here on a barge. The workers are off work. Suddenly we realize we're completely dependent on outside sources. So there's an understanding then that you have to have a combination of a global food system and very, very active and effective local and regional food systems. So there's a balance. You know, if on one hand there's drought and famine, it's very good to be able to import food from other areas. But on the other hand, there's dangers with being too dependent on a global system. So it's kind of a relationship between local, regional, and global.
Can I just jump in a second to flesh out the conversation here? You know, it's interesting. I've gone back and forth over the years about what the approach should be. And I started off with regionalization to globalization. I think the way you've crafted it, Robert, is they're not mutually exclusive. And from my study of the Baha'i writings, because here we're really in the business of correlating the Baha'i writings to what we're doing, not just our own individual opinions. My understanding is that there's going to be one aspect in which we're going to need to have a global order immediately first, and we're already seeing it with the war in Ukraine, and that is collective security. We cannot afford the time to start regionally or nationally or in smaller areas and regionally in order to solve this global challenge. It has to be done at the global level. And that message of the House of Justice that I quoted from a couple of two years ago or so, says that very clearly, that there will be a formal agreement basically between a majority of nations that will be backed up by a system of collective security. The second thing I'd like to add is Abdu'l-Baha in 1912 was already saying that we need to move to a world federation. And Shoghi Effendi, writing in the 1930s, was telling individual Baha'is that when you go and talk to your friends about the Baha'i faith, the first thing you should talk about is not oneness and all of this, but the first thing is what? The imminent need for a world government and a world federation. So, and then he mentions the United States as an example. And if we take the world as an example of the states that were the loosely associated states in America, he says we should view this as the analogy. They had the same problems that the globe is having, the debt problems, financial problems, security problems, and they recognized that the only solution was to integrate and move to a world federation. Once you move to world federation, then a lot of these problems is self-resolve, because a whole bunch of things are decided at the local level, the appropriate things are decided at the state level, appropriate things are decided at the regional level, and then certain things like climate change and collective security that can only be solved by all 193 nations acting together in concert through a global legislature will be solved at the world federal level. So I think I've noticed that as Baha'is, we have a tendency to say, oh, this is all in the far distant future. But I keep reading the world order letters, and I can see that there's some areas where the Guardian seems very intent that we're going to globalize, we're going to need to globalize very quickly because of the situation. Climate change isn't going to wait for us, right? We can't wait to self-destruct. We don't have much time. We don't even have 100 years. We're talking now in orders of decades. So enough said.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Eternal Entropy. I like this nick. Eternal Entropy is watching us from Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for your good words, Eternal Entropy. Let me read one question that is very different from what we discussed, I think, very different from what we discussed today. Andrew Lafton is writing, my question has to do with living in an era of falsehood and disinformation. How does the Baha'i faith propose to establish truth as a sine qua non of stable personal and governmental relationships. This is a question for everyone. Any reaction about how to fight falsehood and disinformation?
Well, first in our individual lives, I'll just quickly say by seeking a wide variety of sources in terms of gleaning our own information, and then recognizing that truth lies somewhere in the middle of all of them. But most importantly, in role modeling through creation of Baha'i institutions, and by training ourselves to elect fit leaders, and by starting to have conversations with other people about the importance of electing fit leaders and the importance of character and specifying the qualities which Abdu'l-Baha lays out specifically in Secret of Divine Civilization. He enumerates all the qualities that we need in a fit leader, and he also tells us that we need to be examining the motivations of those leaders. This is a subject close to my heart. It's something I've been thinking about and writing about for quite a while. How do we go about creating truth? Truth in society starts, the culture is often set at the top. So we start at the grassroots by first educating the electorate. Once we recognize the value of this spiritual principle, we will then demand that our leaders have it, and we will then elect leaders who have this as a fixed quality. They will then be the ethical legislators that Hooshmand was talking about, who will then legislate using this. These are some thoughts.
I may just say a few principles of the Baha'i faith that may help in this way. For example, independent investigation of truth. For example, universal and compulsory education. The principle of consultation. The principle of harmony between science and religion. The question of women empowerment. There are a number of principles in the Baha'i faith that can help identify truth from false at the individual level, at the community level, at the institutional level.
Yeah, I just thought I'd add that I think that the program of the faith, where there's a focus on training children to have a strong moral character, which involves qualities like truthfulness, and then working with junior youth on this idea of spiritual empowerment, where they learn to read their reality in their communities. They learn to articulate their thoughts and feelings, to participate directly in social action, which they devise themselves. I think this is laying the and then if we go on through the whole educational process involving youth and adults, it's really laying the groundwork for our ability to recognize reality, recognize truth, not be manipulated and tricked and so on. So I think this whole program is really, I think, addresses what this question has raised.
Thank you, guys. The question of disinformation is very important to me nowadays during the war between Ukraine and Russia, because just yesterday, on July 23rd, Russian missile attack destroyed one of the greatest cathedral in Odessa in Ukraine. And right at the same day, Russians inserted into the Wikipedia article about this cathedral that this cathedral was destroyed by Ukrainian anti-missile defense system. This kind of level of disinformation is really amazing, simply amazing. And it's very, very difficult to change the perception of people when they are overwhelmed by propaganda from all sides. All right. Andrew Lafton has a question to Hooshmand Badee. Dr. Badee, how does your description of economics as being based on personal relationships differ from the current practice of behavioral economics?
Well, this is a very good question. As I mentioned in my presentation about the concept of economics and how the economics is defined today, most of the time when we see the term economics, we think that economic subject is a university subject, or it is a subject for international organizations. I mentioned that economics starts from the family. In fact, one of the definitions of economics given by Abdul Baha is related to family. And in fact, the original term of economics as what is the original term? Oikonomia. Oikonomia, which is a Greek word, comes from the household. That is the origin, the foundation of economics. So for me, we have to start economics from children, from family, at the grassroots. Some of the terms and economic principles children should know. During this COVID-19, for example, people didn't go to work. Children ask questions, why my parents don't go to work? What is the concept of unemployment? Where the money comes? How we spend? What is the good cost? What is the bad cost? What is saving? These are all the principles and things that we have to start at home with parents and children, with consultation, some of the aspects of economics. Economics must start from the grassroots, from the children, from the family, and go up. And of course, we should not deny the principles and economics at the university level. They are also fine, that is on place, but it is a combination of economics at the top and economics at the bottom. This is my feeling that the behavioral economics today, we have to start from children. Children should know what is the purpose of life. Children must know what is the question of saving, what is prices, what are goods, what are services, what is corruption, why there are bribery, you know. I was just looking at one paper. The amount of money spent on only corruption and bribery is $1.8 trillion annually. Corruption is the foundation of some of the international organizations. Bribery is the foundation of some of the governments and international organizations. These are the things that we have to educate children at the schools and in the family level. Economics must start from the bottom going up.
Thank you, Hooshmand. Actually, our presenters answered, or at least touch upon some of the questions that I read here. So we will wrap it up with two final questions. The first one to Sovaida Ma'ani from Robert Moshzadeh. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Regarding adopting three new behaviors, would you please comment on the role of new consultation in quotes?
Yes, it's definitely. So this was just three behaviors. They gave us each 15 minutes to talk. So there are many new behaviors we need to adopt. Consultation is a key aspect. There's a very interesting statement in the Baha'i writings which I love, that consultation is a practical expression of the principle of justice. So if we're seeking truth and we're seeking justice, then this new consultation, which is a form of consultation, I'm assuming this is what you're alluding to, Robert, proposed in the Baha'i writings, where we all come to the table and the goal of the collective is to attain the truth of the matter, that a truth that is for the collective good, that we each put forward our opinions frankly and lovingly with respect, but then detach our egos from them, and that through the clash of varying opinions, the spark of truth comes. And something else that we don't talk about, even in the Baha'i community enough, is that part of that same paragraph is that nobody has the right to be offended. So when we each express frankly our opinions, other people in the group don't have the right to be offended by a person's expression, because otherwise Abdul Baha says people won't speak frankly out of fear, and then you won't have the clash of opinions. So yes, it's a key element, and in terms of the first behavior of the institutions that we need to create, it's foundational to the work and the processes of those institutions coming together and consulting in that spirit, in the spirit of the new consultation. There's a lot more to be said, but there are lots of good books and videos on consultation. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sovaida. May Badee is writing that she's watching us from Scotland. Thank you for the wonderful and informative program. Thank you, May, for watching us. Now,
let me say hi to May, because she's my wife.
Are you? Where are you, Hooshmand? You also in Scotland?
Yeah, I am upstairs and she's downstairs.
Ah, well, it's not a big distance.
They're demonstrating that it all starts with the family, which is the point that Hooshmand has been trying to make.
Yes, I'm talking to you from Scotland. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, great. So let me read our last question. And this is a question for everybody. Okay, here it is. Julian Kauzai, I'm not sure I pronounced this name right. How, as a Baha'i, can we best affect the changes, meaning those changes that you guys have described? Are we to join global, national, and regional bureaucracies and change from the inside? Should we outreach to the managerial class of society who influences these systems, or focus on changing spiritual characteristics on the grassroots level?
Well, I'll put in a word for, I think, you know, there are so many people who are engaged in change processes at the level of bureaucracies and managerial levels and politics and so on. There's very few people who are able to engage as we are as Baha'is or friends of the faith in this grassroots spiritual empowerment process. So I think that should be our focus. However, we also find ourselves in different jobs and positions and engagements where we can have an influence on the discourse that's happening through our work and our volunteerism and so on. But I don't know. I think it's the more attention we can pay to this sort of grassroots empowerment process and educational processes that the faith offers, the better.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else wants to add something? We are almost 1 hour and a half through our stream, and I think we should not exhaust our viewers. Let me say in conclusion, first of all,
sorry,
Hooshmand, you want to add something, please?
Yeah. If you have time.
For you, always.
If you look at the Baha'i writings, and especially writings of Baha'u'llah, we see two set of writings. One is to Baha'is, to believers, Baha'i belief, and it says that to the people of Baha. It means to Baha'is, and the other sets are to the people of the world. The concept of unity and oneness is always to the people of the world. In other words, we as Baha'is, we should remember that we are not the only one to create unity. We need the help of the entire world population to come and join us and help establishing this concept of unity. And interestingly, in the Baha'i writings, there is a system because some critics say that unity is a utopian. They say it's a good idea, but not practical. But I say that utopian is when there is no application, when there is no way to achieve that. In the Baha'i community, there is a system. There's short-term plan and long-term plan. The long-term plan is given by Baha'u'llah himself, and it takes time to achieve them. We have also short-term plan on the daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly and annual basis, given by the Universal House of Justice to the Baha'i community, preparing us and the Baha'i community going towards achieving the unity of mankind, the unity of humankind. So at this time, Baha'is are building the foundation, but we are not alone, and we should not be alone. We need the help of others to come and join us and build the foundation.
Can I just add one thing?
Thank you. Sure. Yes, please, Sovaida, you have the last word.
Totally agree with Paul and Hooshmand. The Guardian says, apropos of what Paul says, that many other people can be doing the rest of the work, but the Baha'is are the only ones who can be building the administrative order, which is the nucleus and pattern for the future world order. Secondly, absolutely, the statement turning point that came out at the turn of 2000, it was the first lines really shook me, because in it, through the guidance of the House of Justice, I think it was the BIC who wrote this, said that the time has come and gone for the leaders have had their opportunity and they failed. And now it's up to every man, woman, and child to be engaged in this conversation. So this ties in my mind, to what Hooshmand is saying. We need to start engaging people everywhere, including like-minded organizations. But there's a fascination, and that historically has been there, with going from managerial people in top positions, UN officials, I don't know, Makari Maks, heads of government. In my humble opinion, they are not going to do very much for us. We may have lovely, roundtable conversations with them, but in terms of moving the ball forwards, I think that statement from the House that the time that they had their opportunity and the time is now gone very much applies. Now it's going to be the grassroots that causes a swell, that forces our leaders, will actually hopefully create fit leaders who will then be the ones to take the decisions for the majority. But the kinds of leaders we have today, they failed us. And the House of Justice has repeatedly said this, including a year ago in a statement, that it's going to take a Herculean feat of statesmanship to get us where we need to go, because we're nowhere near it.
Thank you, Sovaida, and thank you, Hooshmand, and thank you, Paul, for your excellent presentations and for participating in this panel. Now, also, I thank our readers. Lori Cameron wrote that she is watching us from Port Townsend, Washington. So thank you, Lori, and thank you, everyone else. Let me say in conclusion that, number one, we are going to have the second part of this panel in August. So please make sure you register for the panel and participate actively in it. And number two, if you are watching this panel already after our live stream as a recorded version, please, again and again, I tell you that you have to like us. Please just push the like button as many times as possible. Well, not for one person, but many people. And write as many comments as possible, really, because that is how the YouTube algorithm is working. The more comments of any nature we have, the more likes and dislikes, by the way. We have the more times this video will be offered for potential viewers, and we will have a larger audience, and therefore we will have better impact on this audience. So thank you again, everybody. And now let me welcome back Robert Stockman to finish our panel.
Well, there's not a lot for me to add. I want to thank all of you, especially Mikhail, for putting this together and for doing such a marvelous job of hosting it and of giving it a real warm feeling of hospitality. There was a synergy and an energy amongst the panelists that I think all of us could feel, a certain collaboration in the way you answered and a consultation in the way you answered, which I think was really quite synergistic, which was really quite nice. So I want to thank all of you, and again, urge our audience to tune in 3 weeks for the second panel of authors from this particular book. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Wilmette Institute's webinar series today. We hope that you have enjoyed the program and will take insights from it into your life and your discourse with others. Please tell others about our series so that they can benefit from our amazing array of subjects. We hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.